Welcome back to Mr. Asher Stories, where forgotten truths come to light. And the strongest legacies are written not in money, but in sacrifice. Tonight's tale isn't just about a man who built an empire. It's about the woman who held her ground when he walked away, and the son she raised to rewrite his future with grace. This is a journey of quiet strength, long-buried secrets, and the healing power of truth. So sit back, relax, and let this story remind you that sometimes the key to an empire isn't in a boardroom. It's in a mother's hands. Before the story unfolds, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Asher Stories. Every click helps us bring more powerful, life-changing tales your way. And if you believe in the strength of family and second chances, drop a heart in the comments below. Jonathan Pierce was 24 and hungry, not just for success, but for the kind of validation that comes with seeing your name on a skyline. He'd been sleeping 4 hours a night, living off black coffee and ambition, dragging a duffel bag full of blueprints and half-baked business proposals from one meeting to the next in downtown Chicago. His company, Pierce Innovations, was still an idea with legs, but it hadn't yet found the ground to run on. That was when he met Elaine. She was waitressing at a networking event hosted by a local entrepreneurs club, an event Jonathan had barely been invited to. He wasn't a member. He'd just sweet-talked his way in by bluffing credentials he didn't yet have. He'd forgotten to eat that day, again, and when Elaine came around offering crab cakes and mini quiches, he smiled for the first time that evening. Elaine wasn't glamorous, not in the red carpet sense, but she had a presence that made men look twice and women look curious. She had dark auburn hair that curled just at the ends, eyes too observant for comfort, and a voice that didn't pander. She was 22, in community college by day, pulling long shifts at night, trying to scrape together enough savings to pursue a nursing degree. What drew Jonathan to her wasn't her looks, it was her unshakable calm. Amid a sea of men shouting into each other's faces about tech valuations and venture rounds, she walked quietly, efficiently, unseen except by him. That night, he stayed long after the event had ended, under the excuse of helping her stack trays and wipe tables. "You don't have to do this," Elaine said, glancing sideways as she cleared wineglasses. "I know," he replied, "but if I leave now, I'll just go back to an empty office and reread rejection emails." She smiled at that. Not flirtatiously, kindly. "What is it you're trying to build?" "A revolution," he said. "In energy, solar, wind, better batteries, whatever it takes. But they all say I'm too young. Maybe they're too old to see it." It was a simple comment, but Jonathan remembered it for years. They talked for 2 more hours. By the end of the night, they were sitting on a loading dock behind the venue, sharing, vending machine chips, swapping stories of parental expectations and missed meals. She told him she hadn't spoken to her own father in 5 years. He told her he wanted to build something big enough that no one would ever tell him no again. Their first kiss came a week later. Their relationship was a series of compressed moments, quick breakfasts, late night calls, coffee runs before her classes, power naps between his investor pitches. They weren't building a life together. They were surviving parallel storms and finding warmth in the eye of it. Within 2 months, she moved in with him, not because he asked, but because her roommate got engaged and kicked her out, and Jonathan offered. He had a small studio downtown, half full of computer parts and business books, but they made it work. They shared takeout and slept side by side on a mattress with no frame. They fought, like any couple under pressure. Jonathan was obsessed with work. Elaine craved more consistency. She was supportive but not submissive. She asked hard questions about his ethics, his willingness to cut corners, the people he stepped over. Sometimes he would snap, telling her she didn't understand business. Other times, he held her so tightly in bed, it felt like he feared the world itself might break them apart. 3 months in, Elaine found herself staring at 2 pink lines on a drugstore pregnancy test. She sat on the closed lid of the toilet, her hand clamped over her mouth. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of Jonathan's desktop computer across the room. It was past midnight. He was working on yet another pitch deck, headphones in, muttering about user acquisition models. Elaine didn't know what to say. She didn't know whether to cry or breathe. She waited until morning. When she finally told him, over cold eggs and burnt toast, Jonathan blinked. Once, then again. I, I don't think this is a good idea, he said slowly. You don't think what is a good idea? The baby. Us, doing this. Elaine, this is not part of the plan. She laughed bitterly. You think I planned this? No. But I'm trying to get something off the ground here. Investors don't fund guys who are distracted. A baby? That's not good for my image right now. Your image? She said, voice rising. I mean it. I'm not ready. I can't do this. You mean you won't? He stood, pacing now. Elaine, we're not even married. Then marry me, she snapped. The words stunned both of them into silence. For a second, she saw it flicker in his face, something tender, something terrified. And maybe, for a second, he considered it. But instead, he exhaled. I'm sorry. I can't. He walked out. Just like that, the man who had once whispered dreams into her ear now left her holding a positive pregnancy test like it was a time bomb. He didn't call for 3 days. When he did, his voice was flat. I think it's best if we don't contact each other anymore. I'm sending you money for a few months. I'm not claiming anything legally. And he hung up. Elaine didn't cash the checks. She didn't want his hush money. She wanted a partner, a father for her child, a man who meant what he said when he told her she mattered. She packed her things that night, left his key on the counter, and moved back in with her aunt in Oak Lawn. She didn't cry, not then. She was too numb. It was only when the baby started kicking 2 months later that she finally wept. Not for Jonathan, but for the life that would grow up, never knowing what a father's voice sounded like at bedtime. The hospital room was dimly lit when Daniel James Warren came into the world, named after Elaine's grandfather. She had chosen not to list Jonathan on the birth certificate. There was no use forcing a title onto a man who had refused the responsibility. She looked into her son's eyes and whispered, I promise you'll never feel unwanted. And she meant it. Elaine got a job as a receptionist at a local health clinic 2 weeks after her maternity leave ended. She couldn't afford daycare, so her neighbor, Mrs. Carter, a retired teacher, watched Daniel for $30 a week. At night, after Daniel was asleep, she took online classes. She wanted to finish her nursing degree, but the bills always came first. There were days she rationed formula, nights she diluted soup with water, mornings when she walked to work in the snow because the car battery had died and there was no money to replace it. Still, she smiled for Daniel. She sang lullabies even when her throat was raw from exhaustion. She told him stories of brave warriors and kind queens and clever children who changed the world. Never once did she say his father's name, but she saw him, in the boy's dark eyes, the sharp jawline, the way he stared at the sky like it held promises. She'd hear Pierce Innovations mentioned on the news. CEO Jonathan Pierce lands new renewable energy contract, or billionaire Jonathan Pierce donates to tech school scholarship fund, and she'd switch off the television. Let the world applaud him. She had something better, a child growing up with love, not lies. One Sunday afternoon, when Daniel was 5, he asked, Mommy, why don't I have a daddy? Elaine froze. She was folding laundry, hands suddenly trembling. She knelt beside him. You do have a daddy, sweetheart. But he couldn't stay. He wasn't ready. Did I do something wrong? No, she said fiercely, cupping his face. You are perfect. He just didn't know how to be a dad. But I do. And I love you enough for both of us. That answer satisfied him. Then. But she knew the questions would come again. And again, she made peace with the fact that one day, Daniel would go looking for the man who walked away. But when that day came, she would stand beside him. Proud. Unashamed. Ready. Because she hadn't raised a mistake. She had raised a miracle. There was no applause when Elaine moved into the small one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago. No welcoming committee. No neighbors bearing cookies or casseroles. Just dust, echoes, and a cracked tile near the kitchen sink that would later slice her foot on a night she forgot to wear slippers. She was 23, alone, and carrying a 3-month-old baby boy who wouldn't stop crying that first night. She paced the floor, whispering every lullaby she remembered from childhood. When he finally fell asleep, swaddled tight against her chest, Elaine sat down on the bare mattress and stared into the ceiling's peeling paint. The silence screamed louder than any heartbreak. There were no more what-ifs about Jonathan. That door had slammed shut the day he ghosted her pregnancy and replaced love with legal distance. There would be no fight for joint custody, no court battle for child support. Elaine didn't want his money if it meant Daniel would be another name on a transaction ledger. She wanted something purer, a future her son could be proud of. So, she created one. The days blurred into each other like colors on wet canvas. Elaine rose every morning before dawn, sometimes earlier if Daniel's cries split the darkness. She'd feed him, rock him back to sleep, then prep her uniform, scrubs for her day job at the Westlake Community Clinic, where she manned the front desk and scheduled appointments for doctors who barely noticed her. At 5 p.m. she'd clock out, take the bus home, drop Daniel with Mrs. Carter, change into jeans and an apron, and begin her shift at the local supermarket. By 11:30 p.m., she was back home. By midnight, she was doing laundry or homework. By 2 a.m., she was praying for just 3 hours of sleep. That was her rhythm, not a grind, not a hustle. A survival tempo only single mothers truly understood. Sometimes she'd pass mirrors and not recognize herself. The girl who once dreamed of being a pediatric nurse now measured life in diaper coupons and overtime pay. Her body ached in ways no one saw. Her mind replayed Jonathan's rejection like a broken record. But she endured, not because she was some heroine, but because she had no choice, because there was a little boy who smiled only when he saw her, because her love for Daniel wasn't conditional. It wasn't strategic. It was elemental. The neighborhood whispered. She was with that rich guy, remember? Got dumped when she got pregnant. Must have done something wrong. He's on Forbes now. She's barely making rent. Elaine learned to walk past them like they were air. She didn't correct their lies, didn't defend her dignity. She just kept walking, pushing Daniel's stroller with pride. There was a day, Daniel's first birthday, when all she could afford was one candle, a boxed cake mix, and a plastic toy car from the thrift store. But the way Daniel squealed when she sang happy birthday, his face smeared with icing, was enough. Enough to fuel another year of sleepless nights. Enough to make every whispered judgment worth enduring. Daniel was a curious child. Quick to laugh, quick to comfort. He had a way of tilting his head when Elaine spoke, as if he were drinking in every syllable. By the time he was 4, he was asking questions that made Elaine pause. Do all boys have dads? Yes, she answered carefully. But sometimes dads aren't ready. Was mine not ready? No, she said, swallowing the lump in her throat. But that's not your fault. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. But he didn't want me? Elaine sat on the carpet, pulled him into her lap and said, he didn't know what he was missing. It was the truth. As much of it as a child could bear. She refused to poison Daniel with bitterness. She would not hand him the weight of her resentment. Instead, she gave him a childhood stitched together with resilience, bedtime stories, and home-cooked meals, even when all she had were rice and frozen vegetables. Every night she tucked him in with the same words, you are loved, you are smart, and you are more than enough. The years moved forward. Daniel grew. Elaine learned the subtle art of budgeting a life on $32,000 a year. She became a master couponer, knew which stores marked down milk on Wednesdays, and which brands of baby food stretched longer. She had a spreadsheet for every dollar, an envelope system for rent, utilities, groceries, and emergencies, though there was rarely money left for the last category. But despite the scarcity, Elaine found ways to give Daniel abundance. Library trips replaced amusement parks. Homemade science projects replaced electronics. Hand-me-downs were sewn into fresh looks. When Daniel asked why they didn't have a car, Elaine said, because walking gives us stories to tell. He believed her. For years, at the clinic, her coworkers began to notice her efficiency. You ever thought about applying to nursing school again? One asked. Elaine nodded. Every day. But tuition was a mountain she couldn't climb, yet. So she worked, saved, waited. She never chased Jonathan, never sent photos, never posted cryptic Facebook statuses hoping he'd reach out. But sometimes at night, she searched his name online. Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Pierce Innovations, Forbes 100, bachelor, billionaire. He looked older, sharper. His jawline was the same. So were his eyes, Daniel's eyes. Elaine would stare for a few seconds, then close the laptop. She refused to feed the ache. When Daniel turned 10, his teacher called. "I think you need to know," she said. "Daniel gave a presentation today. He talked about wanting to be a CEO when he grows up." Elaine laughed. "That's ambitious. He said he wanted to build things but not forget people. He said, 'I want to be like the dad I never had but for other kids.'" Elaine's throat tightened. She hung up and cried in the bathroom. Quietly, fiercely, because somehow her boy had turned pain into purpose. There were hard winters, times when the heating bill meant cutting food costs. When Daniel got the flu, and Elaine took unpaid leave to care for him, losing half her paycheck. There were moments she wanted to give up, but never did. Daniel once asked, "Mom, if someone gave you $1 million, what would you do?" "Buy you new shoes," she said, smiling. "What about you?" "I already got everything I need." It wasn't a lie, not to her. One afternoon, a charity food truck came to their neighborhood. Elaine declined a free meal. "Let someone else take it," she said. "But don't you need it?" The volunteer asked. "I've gotten by this far. I'll get by tomorrow." Later, Daniel asked why she said no. "Because dignity is a kind of wealth too," she told him. That night, he kissed her cheek and said, "When I grow up, I'm gonna buy you a house with stairs." Elaine laughed through tears. "Then I better start practicing going up and down." When Daniel turned 16, he got a part-time job at the same supermarket Elaine once worked at. She watched him leave for his first shift, with a backpack too big for his frame, and pride swelling in her chest. He insisted on buying his own school supplies that year. "I want to help," he said. "You already do," she replied, tousling his hair. By 18, Daniel had scholarships to a state university. Elaine held the acceptance letter like a trophy. She screamed, she danced, she wept. At the send-off dinner, Daniel stood and raised a paper cup. "To my mom," he said, "who taught me that strength isn't loud, that love isn't always easy, but it's always enough." Elaine covered her face as everyone clapped. In that moment, all her sacrifices felt seen. And yet, there were still unspoken truths between them. The man Daniel had never met, the name she never uttered, the inheritance of blood and silence. Elaine knew one day it would come crashing down. That someday, Daniel would ask again, seriously, with the mind of a man, not a boy. She prayed when that day came she would have the strength to tell him everything, not with bitterness, not with shame, but with the dignity she'd carried for 20 years. Because she had not merely survived abandonment, she had built a life in its ruins. And she was ready, always, for the next battle. Daniel Warren had never seen a photograph of his father. He knew his first name, Jonathan, from overheard whispers and one awkward conversation that ended in silence. But that was it. No framed picture, no birthday cards, no shadow at the doorway watching him sleep. Still, Daniel felt his presence. Or more accurately, his absence. It lingered like smoke, in the way Daniel scanned the crowd during elementary school recitals, in the tightness of his chest when Father's Day crafts came around and he had to write a card to Mom instead, in the bitter envy he fought at the playground when other kids ran to tall men who scooped them up in hugs. Elaine did her best. She gave twice the love, bore twice the weight. She never missed a game, a parent-teacher night, a scraped knee. She celebrated his milestones like national holidays. But even a mother's love, infinite as it was, couldn't erase the blank space in Daniel's life. As he grew older, he began to ask harder questions. "Mom, where is he now? What does he do? Why didn't he want me?" Elaine never lied. But she never gave more than was necessary. "He made a choice, sweetheart. One that had nothing to do with you. It was about him, not you." Daniel nodded, but inside, it felt like a riddle, one that made his heart ache. By the time Daniel reached high school, the name Jonathan Pierce no longer belonged to a ghost. It belonged to a titan. He was on the cover of Forbes that fall, the mind behind Pierce Innovations, a photo of him stepping out of a black town car, phone in one hand, sharp, suit tailored to perfection, eyes laser-focused on something ahead. Daniel saw it by accident. The magazine was lying in the school library, and he picked it up while waiting for a friend. The name stopped him cold. Pierce. He stared at the article, scanning for details. Jonathan Pierce, tech disruptor, renewable energy mogul, billionaire, single, no known children. Daniel's pulse quickened. There was a photo of Jonathan shaking hands with the mayor of Chicago at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Another of him on a yacht in Monaco. It wasn't until he flipped to the profile close-up that he froze completely. The resemblance, sharp jaw, slight dimple in the chin, narrow, calculating eyes. Daniel wasn't a child anymore. He had the critical thinking skills of a young man raised on adversity and integrity. He took the magazine home. That night, as Elaine was folding laundry, he laid it on the table. "Is this him?" he asked quietly. Elaine didn't pretend not to understand. She sat down, her hands trembling only slightly. "Yes," she said. "That's your father." They didn't talk much after that. Not that night. Not the next. Daniel wasn't angry. Not yet. Just confused, empty, like his entire self-portrait had been missing a corner and suddenly someone had drawn it in permanent ink. The idea that the man who denied him had built an empire stung deeper than he expected. All these years they'd scraped by. He remembered the eviction scare in 7th grade. The Christmas they shared a $10 gift card and made cocoa from water and leftover chocolate, syrup. And somewhere out there, the man who helped create him was being interviewed about jet-powered aircrafts and hydrogen cell farms? Daniel couldn't understand it. How someone could walk away from flesh and blood and build glass towers instead. And yet, he wasn't entirely mad. Somewhere deep inside, he was curious. What kind of man did that? What would he say if he knew Daniel existed? And worse, did he know? Did he ever wonder? In school, Daniel buried himself in books. He had inherited more than just Jonathan's face. He had his brain, too. Teachers raved about his leadership. Classmates often came to him for help on group projects. He had a knack for solving problems with creative angles, often balancing innovation with empathy. When he led a charity drive for local shelters, his approach stunned even the principal. He merged technology and logistics, turning a simple canned food drive into a month-long community initiative with local business sponsors and mobile donations. "He thinks like a CEO," one teacher said. "He thinks like a survivor," Elaine corrected later, when she heard. Daniel worked part-time all through college. Scholarships covered tuition, but rent and textbooks were on him. He never complained. He moved like a man twice his age, deliberate, grateful, introspective. He volunteered at local clinics, mentored younger students, and helped his mom balance bills during breaks. The older he got, the more people compared him to Jonathan Pierce. Not knowing the irony, "You should look into interning for Pierce Innovations," one professor joked. "With your mind, you'd fit right in." Daniel only smiled. He never said, "I might already be on the payroll." Genetically, it was Elaine who sensed the change first. Something in the way Daniel looked out windows too long. How he clicked on headlines faster than usual. How he stopped flinching when he saw Jonathan's face on TV. He wasn't shrinking from it anymore. He was circling it, like a man circling a locked door he had the key for but wasn't sure he wanted to open. She found him one evening, laptop glowing, scrolling through photos from a charity gala. Jonathan was there, of course, shaking hands, posing with donors. The same half-smile, the same polished armor. Daniel looked up. "If I ever meet him, what do I say?" Elaine sat beside him. "You say what's on your heart, nothing more, nothing less. But what if he still doesn't want me? Then he loses twice." Daniel exhaled. "Did you ever think about taking him to court?" "Every day," she admitted. "But I chose peace. For both of us." He nodded. But he wasn't built to walk away. Not anymore. His 30th birthday came quietly. Elaine baked a strawberry cake, his favorite since childhood, and they had dinner with Mrs. Carter and a few friends from college. There was laughter, photos, toasts, no talk of DNA or billionaires, just warmth. Until one friend, jokingly, handed him a white box wrapped in cheap paper. "Happy birthday," she said. "Now you can finally find out if you're 2% Viking or 100% badass." It was a DNA kit. One of those ancestry ones sold online. Everyone laughed. Except Elaine. Her smile wavered. Just a little, Daniel noticed. Later that night, when the guests were gone and the dishes were stacked, he sat across from her. "You okay?" She nodded. "It's just, I didn't think something like that would ever show up in our lives. Do you not want me to do it?" She took his hand. "I want you to have answers. If you're ready." He looked at the box, then back at her. "I am." It took 2 minutes to swab his cheek, 10 seconds to seal the envelope, 4 weeks to change everything. It sat on the counter, like any ordinary birthday gift. Just a small white box, barely the size of a paperback. But to Elaine, it pulsed like a ticking bomb. Daniel had unwrapped it with a laugh. "Guess it's time I find out if I'm related to royalty," he joked, holding the DNA test kit aloft. Their friends laughed, not knowing the depth that joke cut. Elaine's smile was practiced, her reaction muted. She excused herself to the kitchen under the pretense of needing more ice. In truth, she just needed to breathe. Her hands trembled as she gripped the countertop. This was it. The moment she had prepared for in silence for 30 years, not knowing whether to pray it would come or dread its arrival. When Daniel later asked if she was okay with him taking the test, she said yes, because anything less would have been a lie. But her soul was not ready. He swabbed his cheek that night. Elaine stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You don't have to do this if it feels invasive." "It doesn't," Daniel replied. "It feels like answering a question that's been whispering since I was a kid." And he was right. The whispers had grown louder over the years, especially since discovering Jonathan's identity. The magazine articles, the late-to-night interviews, the knowledge that his blood connected him to someone who had built skyscrapers while Elaine and Daniel slept in second-hand bedding and boiled pasta 5 nights a week. Daniel had questions science might finally answer. And Elaine, despite the knot in her chest, let him ask them. They sealed the kit, mailed it off, and waited. 3 weeks later, Daniel received the email. Subject: "Your DNA results are in." Elaine was at work when he called. "Mom, I think you should come home." She left early, her supervisor frowning but not stopping her. She arrived to find Daniel seated at the kitchen table, laptop open, face pale. "I have a match," he said. Elaine's knees weakened, but she sat. "Who?" "A woman. In her 50s. Says we share 25% DNA." Elaine swallowed. "What's her name?" "Teresa Pierce." The name hit her like a drumbeat. Jonathan's older sister, the one he used to talk about, back when they were still together. The one who lived in Colorado and had studied environmental law. She had no idea Elaine ever existed. Daniel turned the screen. "Look, it says, likely match, Aunt." They stared at it together. 2 decades of pain, validated by code. Daniel laughed, incredulous. "It's real. It's actually real." Elaine nodded, lips trembling. "I told you." "I know," he said, "but seeing it, like this." He reached out to Teresa. Politely, respectfully. Just a message through the DNA platform's messaging system. "Hi, I believe we might be related. My name is Daniel Warren. I think your brother may be my biological father." She replied 4 days later. "I had no idea. But your DNA results speak volumes. I'd like to know more. Can we talk?" Teresa Pierce was stunned. She had always known her younger brother was complicated, ambitious, cold. But a secret son? She requested a Zoom call. Daniel agreed. Elaine sat just out of frame, close enough to step in if needed. Teresa was gracious, kind, and visibly emotional. "I had no idea, Daniel. I'm sorry." "You don't have to be," he said. "It's not your fault." She asked about his childhood, about Elaine, about how it had all unfolded. Elaine stepped into frame midway through the call, introduced herself, and Teresa's face changed. A flash of recognition. "I remember you," she whispered. "Jonathan brought you to a company party once. You were so young." "I had no idea." Elaine nodded. "You weren't supposed to." The call lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, Teresa promised to speak to her brother. "I don't know how he'll react," she warned. "But he needs to know. This can't stay hidden." Elaine and Daniel thanked her. They had taken the first step into light. There was no going back. The email came 3 days later. From Jonathan Pierce, subject, regarding Daniel. Elaine and Daniel sat together as he opened it. "Daniel, I've been informed about the DNA match you found through Teresa. I don't know what to say other than this has shaken me to my core. I'm not prepared to discuss this over email, but I'm not ignoring it. I've taken steps to begin a formal DNA test. You'll be contacted by my team. I would appreciate discretion until we know more. Jonathan Pierce. Daniel stared at the screen. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." Elaine sighed. He might never. The legal test was arranged through a third-party medical lab. No fanfare, no cameras, just a sterile room, a cotton swab, and a signature. Daniel took the test. So did Jonathan, privately, at his personal physician's office. 4 days later, the results were in. 99.9% match. Daniel Warren was the biological son of Jonathan Pierce. The truth had arrived. Not whispered, not guessed, not speculated. Proven. Printed in black and white. Filed in medical records. Irreversible. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. Elaine assumed he was trying to control the narrative. Daniel, however, was done waiting. "I'm not hiding," he said. He posted a photo of himself with Elaine. No caption. Just a simple line. "You raised me into a man. The rest is noise." The post went viral overnight. People asked questions. Then reporters did. The whispers became headlines. Jonathan Pierce's hidden son? DNA surprise. Pierce Innovations CEO faces paternity revelation, heir apparent. The man who may inherit it all. Elaine's phone rang off the hook. Daniel's inbox flooded. The media was relentless. Jonathan had no choice but to speak. His statement came 2 days later. It was broadcast live from a press podium outside Pierce Innovations headquarters. Elaine and Daniel watched from their apartment. Jonathan stepped forward, eyes tired. "I want to confirm that I have recently discovered I am the biological father of a young man named Daniel Warren." A pause. Cameras clicked. "This revelation has caused me to reflect deeply on my past. I made choices in my youth that were selfish. I did not uphold the responsibilities of a man or a father. For that, I am deeply sorry." Elaine's eyes welled. Jonathan continued. "Daniel was raised without my presence. That's on me. But from this moment forward, I hope to build something better. Not just legally, personally. It wasn't a masterpiece of emotion, but it was something." Daniel didn't cry. He didn't smile either. He sat with his arms crossed as the press conference ended. "He waited 30 years to admit I exist." Elaine placed a hand on his knee. "And now the world knows. The man who once walked away from fatherhood now stared at the glowing city skyline, alone, behind the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse." Jonathan Pierce, age 55, was no longer just a name in the financial pages. He had become an institution, a brand, a billionaire whose every public move influenced markets. His empire stretched across renewable energy, smart infrastructure, biotech research, an entire future, imagined and monetized. But that night, none of it mattered. His phone had stopped ringing, temporarily silenced by the PR team trying to manage the explosion of headlines. His sister Teresa had sent only a short text, "You need to talk to him." The board had called 2 emergency meetings in 48 hours. And still, Jonathan couldn't move. He sat in his private study, the same one he had designed to mimic the clean angles of a war room, every surface glass or concrete, every edge sharp. In his hand, he held the printed DNA report. 99.9% match. Daniel Warren, male, age 30, biological son. He read the name again and again, until it no longer looked like a stranger's. Memories leaked in, ones he had spent years walling off. Elaine's tearful face the day she told him about the pregnancy. His own voice, flat and calculated, insisting he wasn't ready. The way she had walked out, shoulders straight, never once looking back. He had told himself she was just another chapter in the story of becoming great. A necessary loss, a distraction removed. He had told himself it wasn't his child. Now science had buried that lie beneath hard data, and in its place, guilt bloomed like a rot in his chest. The next morning, his reflection didn't lie to him. He looked older. Not just older, tired. The lines on his face weren't just from age, they were from denial. His neatly pressed suits couldn't cover the man underneath. the one who had failed at something fundamental. He had created life, then abandoned it. And that life had grown, thrived, without him. At the Pierce Innovations boardroom, the air was sharp with tension. 12 men and women sat around the oval table, expressions guarded. These were his people. Some had stood by him for decades. Others were newer, hungrier, always waiting for a chink in the armor. Now they had one. Jonathan entered without his usual swagger. No greeting, no handshake. He simply said, "Let's talk about Daniel." The silence was thick. One board member, a conservative legal advisor named Marlowe, leaned forward. "The media is already speculating on succession implications. He's your son. That makes him a legal heir. I'm aware. If this turns litigious, the estate planning alone." "It won't," Jonathan cut in. Another voice, this one from Alicia Brandt, head of marketing, added cautiously, "You could spin this. A story of redemption, family, humanity. Investors respond to relatability." Jonathan stared at her. "He's not a storyline." More silence. Then from his CFO, Samir, "Have you contacted him directly?" Jonathan shook his head. "Not yet. That afternoon, he did. A handwritten letter. 3 pages. No assistants, no lawyers. It began simply, 'Daniel, I have failed you.' The words don't come easily, but they must come. Because I owe you more than just acknowledgement. I owe you truth." He explained everything, his fear, his blindness, his ambition. How he had convinced himself denial was better than derailing his career. How that lie grew into silence, and the silence became comfortable. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't presume a relationship. He simply said, "I want to meet you. When you're ready." He mailed it himself. No courier. No email. Just ink, envelope, and the weight of time. Daniel received the letter 5 days later. He read it on the porch while Elaine watered the plants. She watched him from the corner of her eye but said nothing. When he came inside, he placed the letter on the table. He didn't blame you, or me, just himself. Elaine nodded. "That's something." Daniel sat. His hands were steady, but his eyes burned. "I don't know how to feel," he whispered. "He says he wants to meet." Elaine gently sat beside him. "Do you want to?" Daniel stared into nothing for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said, "but on my terms." Meanwhile, the press had moved from speculation to frenzy. Paparazzi camped outside the clinic Elaine worked at. Journalists requested interviews with Daniel's old professors. Social media split into camps. Those praising Jonathan for admitting fault, those crucifying him for the years of abandonment. And then there were the conspiracy theories. Daniel is after the money. Elaine orchestrated this. Jonathan is using this to dodge a tax scandal. Elaine ignored the noise. Daniel stayed quiet. But Jonathan, he watched everything. Every headline, every thread. And for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. That powerlessness led him to do something uncharacteristic. He drove. Alone. No driver, no bodyguards. He pulled into a modest neighborhood on the south side of the city, parked. His luxury sedan 2 blocks away from the address Teresa had given him, Elaine's house. He didn't knock. Just sat in the car, heart hammering, watching the front door like a man studying a monument he helped build but never touched. After 15 minutes, the front door opened. Daniel stepped out, garbage bag in one hand, earbuds in. He didn't see the car, didn't see Jonathan. But Jonathan saw him, for the first time. His son, not a mystery, not a scandal. A man. Tall, confident posture, sharp features. A flash of Elaine in the way he tilted his head. Jonathan's throat tightened. He didn't get out. He didn't call out. He just watched, frozen. Then he drove away. That night, he called his sister. "I saw him." Teresa's voice was quiet. "And he looks like me." "No, John," she said. "He looks like both of you." Elaine sat by the window of her modest living room, watching the storm roll in. The sky above South Chicago had turned an angry gray, thunder rumbling in the distance. But the storm brewing outside wasn't half as fierce as the one brewing in her world. News vans lined her street like vultures. Reporters were stationed at the end of the block, speaking into cameras about the hidden heir of Pierce Innovations. speculating wildly about paternity tests, billion-dollar estates, and whether Daniel would take legal action. Every corner of Elaine's quiet world had been overturned. She had weathered hardship for 30 years, poverty, judgment, solitude. But this was different. Now the entire nation had a front-row seat to a private story she'd protected like sacred scripture. And Daniel, her boy, stood at the center of it. In less than a week, his face had been splashed across morning shows, business blogs, and internet tabloids. He had declined all interviews, refused to issue any public statement. Still, the media dubbed him with monikers: the forgotten son, the billionaire, Secret, the nanny's revenge, which Elaine particularly despised. She wasn't a nanny. She was a mother. A damn good one. What stung more was how easily the press spun her story into a cautionary tale. The jilted young woman, the powerful man, the son caught in between. No one told the story of strength, dignity, and decades of sacrifice. Not until Daniel spoke. And when he did, the world stopped to listen. It was a Sunday morning when Daniel stood at the steps of his old high school gym, the same place where he once helped sweep floors after class for extra credit, and gave his first public address. Dozens of microphones pointed at him. Elaine stood behind him, flanked by Teresa and a few trusted friends. Jonathan was not present. That had been Daniel's request. No media handlers, no lawyers, just his truth. He stepped to the mic. "I was raised by a woman who worked 16-hour days to make sure I never went to bed hungry." A pause. "I found out recently that the man who helped create me is Jonathan Pierce. Yes, that Jonathan Pierce. The businessman, the billionaire, the philanthropist." The crowd murmured. He was absent, by choice. "But I don't stand here today seeking pity. I don't need validation from tabloids or titles. I stand here because people are saying my name now, and I want them to know what it means." His voice grew steadier. "My name is Daniel Warren. My mother gave me that name. She gave me everything. And whatever I do from here, whatever legacy I build, it will be rooted in her strength, not his absence." Elaine blinked back tears. Daniel looked at her, then continued, "Some have asked if I'll go after the fortune. Let me be clear. I'm not after his money. I'm after the truth, my identity, and whatever legal rights that truth brings, I'll face them head on. But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because every child deserves to know where they came from, and every parent should be held accountable." Applause broke out, not the kind staged for optics, the kind that builds from the gut. He stepped back. Elaine hugged him, and for the first time in 3 decades, the world saw her, not as Jonathan's ex, not as the abandoned girl, but as a woman who had carried the weight of a man's failure and raised a legacy in its place. Jonathan watched the speech from his office, alone. He had seen many take podiums before, CEOs, investors, politicians, but never had he seen someone wield truth like Daniel did, without malice, without arrogance, just conviction. He turned off the screen and whispered to no one, "That's my son." Behind the scenes, the corporate implications began to unfold. Pierce Innovations had long been the subject of succession rumors. Jonathan, a lifelong bachelor with no acknowledged children, had built the company in his image but never chosen a clear heir. Board members whispered about mergers, sell-offs, possible trust transitions. Now, everything changed. Legally, Daniel, having proven paternity, was a potential beneficiary of Jonathan's estate. If Jonathan died tomorrow, Daniel could claim equal standing to any child born in wedlock. The company's lawyers scrambled to assess what assets could be challenged. Trusts set up years ago, charitable foundations, stock options. It was all up for legal review. Some saw it as a crisis. Others saw it as a miracle. Public sentiment shifted rapidly. Online polls asked, should Daniel inherit? Talk shows debated the morality of Jonathan's past and the strength of Elaine's parenting. Female-led media outlets rallied around her story. Hashtags "Lie Justice for Elaine" and hashtag "He Raised Him" trended on Twitter for days. And then came the offers. Book deals, movie rights, sit-down interviews. Elaine declined them all. Daniel did too. "We're not selling our pain," he told her. She smiled. "You sound like me." But not everyone welcomed their rise. Inside Pierce Innovations, some board members resisted the idea of Daniel stepping into the spotlight. He hadn't climbed the corporate ladder. He hadn't paid his dues, they argued. He's a wild card, Marlowe warned during a private session. We don't know his temperament. Jonathan listened quietly, then finally said, "You didn't know mine either. And I built this." Marlowe clenched his jaw. "That was different. You didn't have a scandal attached to your name." Jonathan leveled his gaze. "This isn't a scandal. This is the truth, and it's about time we stopped being afraid of it." 1 week later, Jonathan invited Elaine and Daniel to his home. No assistants, no media, just the three of them. Elaine hadn't been inside anything remotely resembling a mansion in years. Marble floors, panoramic views. It was surreal. Jonathan greeted them at the door himself. No tux, no watch, just a man. Grayer, thinner, but finally real. He motioned them in. "I don't know how to begin," he said. "Start with, 'I'm sorry,'" Elaine replied. He nodded. "I am." They sat in the main lounge, which could have hosted a gala but instead held three quiet souls searching for resolution. "I don't expect forgiveness," Jonathan said to Daniel. "But I want to know you." Daniel didn't flinch. "Why now?" "Because I was a coward," Jonathan admitted, "and I thought success could erase failure. But it didn't. It only delayed it." Elaine crossed her arms. "And what do you want from him now? A photo op? Closure?" "No," Jonathan said, turning to her. "I want to do what I should have done 30 years ago. Stand beside him." There was a long silence. Then Daniel said, "You don't get to skip the hard parts." "I know. You'll have to prove yourself." "I want to." Elaine studied him. "And what about me?" Jonathan turned, his voice softer. "You were right, about all of it. I just wasn't man enough to admit it." Her lips pressed together, not in forgiveness, but in understanding. Then to Daniel she said, "It's your call. Whatever you decide, I stand with you." Daniel nodded. "I'll meet with your board," he said to Jonathan. "But not as your son. As a man with his own vision." Jonathan exhaled. "That's more than I deserve." Daniel stood. "Then earn it. If this story is touching your heart so far, let us know. Comment with truth always finds its way, if you believe the past can be redeemed. And if you haven't yet, subscribe now, because here at Mr. Asher Stories we tell tales that heal, inspire, and make you think. The boardroom of Pierce Innovations was a modern cathedral, tall glass walls, a 20-foot table made of reclaimed redwood, and 12 leather chairs arranged with clinical precision. At the head of the room was Jonathan's seat, slightly elevated, a subtle symbol of hierarchy. That morning, for the first time, Jonathan did not sit there. He stood, waiting, because his son was coming. Daniel arrived precisely at 9 a.m., dressed in a fitted navy suit he had borrowed from a friend and tailored last minute. He had shaved, combed his hair, and left the trace of a nervous smile at home. This was not a visit. This was an introduction on his terms. Elaine had driven him to the building, gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. "You don't have to prove anything to them," she said as he stepped out. "I know," he replied. "But I want to." She nodded. "Just remember who you are. I'm your son." With that, he stepped into the lion's den. Security had been briefed. Receptionists smiled too brightly. Elevators were held open just for him. It was surreal. When he walked into the boardroom, a dozen eyes turned. Some skeptical, some curious, a few outright cold. But at the head of the table, Jonathan stepped forward. "Daniel," he said, extending his hand. Daniel took it. A handshake, yes, but more than that, an acknowledgement. Jonathan turned to the board. "Everyone, this is Daniel Warren, my son." The silence was sharp. Then Alicia, head of marketing, cleared her throat. "Welcome, Daniel. Thank you for joining us." Others offered polite nods. One or two did not. Daniel met every eye. "I'm not here to take anything that doesn't belong to me," he said. "I'm here because truth brought me here, and because I believe in legacy, not just bloodline." That startled them. The meeting was closed door. No media, no assistants, just the core leadership of a billion-dollar company, and the man they'd never expected to see in that room. Jonathan opened with a simple statement. "I've spent my life building Pierce Innovations. I've made many smart decisions, and one terrible one. I ignored my son. I walked away from a woman stronger than I ever deserved. He paused, and now I'm correcting it. Samir, the CFO, interjected. With all due respect, Jonathan, what role do you see Daniel playing? He's not an executive. He has no corporate experience. Daniel responded before Jonathan could. I'm not here to pretend I built this company. I didn't. But I've studied your business model, your quarterly reports. I've listened to your town halls, and I have ideas. Fresh ones. Marlowe scoffed. Ideas don't run companies. No, Daniel said. But heart does. And from what I've seen, you've been running without one for a while. That silenced the room. Even Jonathan blinked. After the meeting, Daniel didn't linger. He shook hands with those who offered, thanked them for their time, and left without fanfare. Jonathan walked with him to the elevator. You made an impression, he said. Daniel pushed the button. I wasn't trying to. That's why it worked. A beat passed. I'd like to show you something, Jonathan said. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. They drove north, past the steel and glass of the city, into a quieter district. Jonathan parked outside a construction site, gated, guarded, still in early stages. What is this? A new project, Jonathan said. Pierce Living. Affordable, sustainable housing. The first of its kind from our company. Daniel stared. I had no idea you did projects like this. I didn't, Jonathan admitted. Until last week. Daniel turned to him. Is this for show? No, Jonathan said. It's because of you. Daniel said nothing. But inside, something shifted. That night, Elaine was waiting on the porch when he returned. She rose when he stepped out of the car. Well? She asked. Daniel exhaled. It was strange, like walking into someone else's memory. But I held my own. She hugged him. I never doubted that. Over the next few weeks, things moved fast. Pierce Innovations issued a statement formally acknowledging Daniel as Jonathan's biological son. Jonathan updated his will. The media shifted from scandal to spectacle, now speculating on whether Daniel would become the next CEO. Elaine kept her distance. She didn't attend press events or corporate mixers, but behind closed doors, she was Daniel's compass. Don't get lost in their world, she told him. I won't, he promised. One morning, Daniel received an invitation. A private dinner from Jonathan's current wife. Her name was Clarissa. She was 20 years younger than Jonathan and looked the part, poised, designer-dressed, icy. She had never met Elaine, never acknowledged Daniel's existence until the media forced her to. The dinner was tense from the start. She greeted Daniel with a forced smile. It's brave of you to come. I wasn't aware it required bravery. She sat across from him. The table was long, the meal prearranged. I just wanted to understand your intentions, she said. With the company, with your father. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You think I'm here for his money? Are you? No, he said. But if I were, I'd have more right to it than you. That silenced her. Daniel leaned forward. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm trying to understand who I am. You can be threatened, or you can be honest, but I'm not going away. Clarissa sipped her wine, then said, You have his eyes. The next day, Jonathan called Elaine. I need to see you, he said. She hesitated. I'm not here to make peace, she warned. I'm not asking for peace, he said. Just truth. They met in a park near where she used to live. Jonathan brought nothing. No guards, no gifts. Elaine wore simple jeans and a windbreaker. For a long time they just stood there. Finally he said, You raised a remarkable man. She nodded. I know. I'm sorry I missed it. You chose to. I know, he said, voice cracking. And I carry that. She looked at him, not the billionaire, not the public figure, but the man. You want redemption, she said. It won't come easy. I don't expect it to. She paused, then start by listening. And they walked. Slowly, talking about Daniel, about those early days, about the pain neither of them had fully admitted. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the beginning of something human. 3 weeks after his first appearance at Pierce Innovations, Daniel stood at the precipice of a world shaped by power and contracts. What had started as a truth uncovered in DNA results had now become a legal and corporate reality. The lawyers came next. They circled like hawks in tailored suits and Italian leather shoes. Representatives from Jonathan's personal legal team, the Pierce Innovations, corporate counsel, and estate attorneys brought in to re-evaluate everything from trust documents to intellectual property shares. Elaine stayed far from it all. "This isn't my battlefield," she told Daniel. "Just make sure you don't become one of them." He nodded, but he knew this battlefield wasn't optional anymore. If he didn't step in with clarity and strength, others would write the terms of his future without him. At the center of the legal storm sat one crucial question: what exactly did Daniel want? Jonathan, to his credit, had told his team to grant Daniel full inheritance rights. But Daniel didn't want inheritance, not blindly. "I want ownership only if I earn it," he told the attorneys. "I won't be someone who shows up and cashes checks because of blood." They offered alternatives: an executive mentorship track, a stake in the philanthropic arm, a board observer seat. Each option was carefully couched in legal padding, designed to include him without giving too much power. Daniel declined them all. "I'm not here for charity," he said. "If I join this company, it's going to be as a contributor. I want a probationary seat on the board, 6 months. After that, you decide if I stay." The board was stunned. So was Jonathan. "You're putting yourself on trial," he told Daniel in private. "No," Daniel replied. "I'm putting your company on trial too." Daniel hired his own lawyer, a woman named Sasha Klein. Sharp, direct, no nonsense. She had a reputation for defending whistleblowers and activists. Elaine was the one who recommended her. "She'll keep you grounded," she said. "And she doesn't care how much money anyone has." During their first strategy meeting, Sasha asked Daniel a simple question: "Do you want the company?" He hesitated. "I want to shape what it becomes." "Then we don't negotiate from weakness," she said. "We offer a vision, one that builds from your story, not from your father's legacy." Together, they drafted a proposal: a temporary board seat, renewable after 6 months based on performance reviews, a commitment to community-driven innovation initiatives under Daniel's oversight, a formal mentorship plan involving each department, a binding clause that prevented Jonathan or any other member from publicly using Daniel's image for promotional purposes without consent, and most critically, a clause that guaranteed Elaine Warren would be acknowledged in internal company histories and philanthropy projects. As a founder of the man now influencing Pierce's future, Jonathan didn't push back. When he read that final clause, he set the contract down and said, "She deserves more than that. But it's a start." The board meeting to finalize the terms was tense. Alicia supported the plan. So did Samir, cautiously. Marlowe remained opposed. "It's too fast," he argued. "We don't know this kid. He hasn't earned our trust." "He's not a kid," Jonathan said. "And none of you earned your seats in 6 months either. Most of you bought them." Daniel stood at the end of the room, silent until the vote was called. The result: 7 in favor, 3 against, 2 abstentions. He was in. Probationary, conditional, but in. A seat at the table. That night, he called Elaine. "I'm in," he said. "I know," she replied. "How?" "I heard it in your voice." Meanwhile, the world watched. Major outlets ran headlines: "Pierce legacy secured. Daniel Warren joins boardroom." From Forgotten Son to Boardroom Star, the rise of Daniel Warren. Daniel was offered interviews by everyone from 60 Minutes to The New Yorker. He turned them all down. Instead, he recorded a short video, 5 minutes, posted on his own terms. In it, he said, "I'm not replacing Jonathan Pierce. I'm not rewriting his past. I'm writing my own future, one built on resilience, transparency, and the lessons my mother taught me about what leadership really means." The video went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. In private, Jonathan began stepping back. He canceled 3 speaking engagements, delayed his next international trip, and for the first time in years he began arriving at work past sunrise. His assistants noticed the change. Less edge, more thought. He'd stare at old photos, ones he had hidden in a drawer, images of him as a young man, before power hardened his heart. One morning, he placed a photo on his desk. It wasn't of himself. It was of Daniel, standing beside Elaine, both of them laughing at a small community fair 5 years earlier. A photographer had captured it by accident. Jonathan had kept the photo in secret for years. Now it was on display. Clarissa, his wife, noticed the shifts too. She grew colder. "You're letting them in," she said one night, her voice tight. "You're handing over everything." "I'm handing over what should have never been taken," Jonathan replied. "They're going to change everything." "I hope so." She said nothing more, but she didn't sleep in the same bed that night. Daniel didn't care about Clarissa's coldness. He wasn't here to make her comfortable. But he did care about the company, and now he was inside it. He walked the halls of Pierce Innovations not as a visitor, but as an insider. Departments whispered when he passed. Some greeted him with respect, others with curiosity, a few with quiet resentment, but he didn't shrink. He sat in on engineering meetings, asked questions during R&D reviews, challenged marketing assumptions with insights drawn from the ground level. Real people, real customers, real problems. People started to notice. "He's different," one executive said. "He listens," said another. "He's more Pierce than Pierce," someone whispered. One afternoon, Daniel hosted a town hall, company-wide. Employees expected Jonathan. Instead, Daniel stood at the podium. He didn't bring a speech. He brought a story about a boy raised by a single mother, about watching his mom skip dinner so he could eat, about walking to school in second-hand shoes, and about never once feeling poor because he was rich in something deeper: love, values, truth. Then he spoke about what Pierce Innovations needed next. Not just growth, he said, but heart, integrity, empathy. That's the innovation no one's paying for, but everyone's starving for. The applause was thunderous. In the back of the room, Jonathan watched quietly, smiling, not because Daniel had become like him, but because Daniel had never tried. Power didn't come with a nameplate, not at first. For Daniel Warren, it came in the form of silence, awkward pauses when he entered a room, sideways glances at the water cooler, whispers behind conference room glass. The employees of Pierce Innovations didn't quite know what to make of him. To them, Daniel was a symbol, the son no one had seen coming, the quiet man with the loud backstory. Some thought he was a corporate PR stunt, a redemption arc for a CEO looking to polish his legacy. Others saw him as a ticking time bomb, too young, too inexperienced, too emotional. But Daniel didn't come to impress. He came to learn and to lead. His first week as a probationary board member was spent walking the floors, not the executive suite, but the floors where actual innovation happened: R&D labs, tech development bays, customer service cubicles. He shook hands with receptionists, ate lunch in the employee cafeteria, asked questions no one else had ever bothered to ask. What's the biggest obstacle in your day? What policy makes your work harder, not better? What's one thing you'd change if you had the power? At first, people answered with hesitation, but soon, honesty flowed. Too many layers of approval for simple changes were burning out. Management doesn't ask why the turnover's high. There's no accountability at the top, just optics. Daniel listened. He took notes. He didn't offer solutions, not yet. Back in the boardroom, things were colder. Some members, especially Marlowe, made it clear they viewed Daniel as an outsider. "Still playing reporter?" Marlowe sneered after a meeting. "You know walking the halls doesn't replace governance, right?" Daniel smiled. "Governance means nothing if you don't know the people you govern." Marlowe scoffed. "You sound like your mother." "Thank you," Daniel replied, and walked away. Jonathan observed from a distance. He didn't interfere. Not directly, but he watched. He noticed when Daniel proposed a revamp of the employee feedback system, one that bypassed managerial filters and allowed for anonymous reporting directly to the board. He saw the early analytics showing improved morale in just 3 weeks, and he heard the shift in tone during department meetings. "He actually hears us," one lead engineer said. "He doesn't act like he's above us," added another. Slowly, Daniel wasn't just a name anymore. He was becoming a presence. Of course, not everyone was pleased. In the 4th week, Daniel's email account was targeted by an anonymous smear campaign. Claims that he had falsified college achievements, whispers that Elaine had coached him to manipulate Jonathan for money. A few low-level blogs ran with the story. Most didn't. But one found its way to the inbox of a major investor, and that investor called Jonathan directly. "You better get a lid on your son before the shareholders start asking who's really running your empire," the man warned. Jonathan didn't raise his voice. But that afternoon, he traced the IP address of the smear email using a private IT firm. It came from Marlowe's assistant. Within 24 hours, Marlowe was dismissed for misconduct. Jonathan made no public statement, but everyone in the company knew the old guard was losing its grip. Daniel didn't gloat. When Elaine heard what happened, she simply said, "That's what happens when lies meet sunlight." Daniel replied, "He wasn't scared of me. He was scared of what I represent." "And what's that?" she asked. "Change." Daniel's first major project came in week 6. The company had long planned to shut down a satellite office in Detroit, a location that had underperformed financially but employed over 120 workers. The board was unanimous. Close it. Cut losses. Daniel wasn't convinced. He flew to Detroit on a Thursday morning, met with the employees, toured the office, talked to the clients that branch serviced. What he found was eye-opening. The office hadn't failed because of incompetence. It had been starved of resources, stripped of support, treated like an afterthought. Yet despite that, the team had built a loyal regional client base and maintained excellent customer satisfaction. They were being punished for a failure of leadership, not of effort. When Daniel returned, he presented an alternative. Keep the office open. Invest in updated equipment and local marketing. Restructure management. Give it 1 year. Prove it can't succeed before you bury it, he told the board. They were skeptical, but Jonathan backed him. "We've wasted more money on riskier gambles," he said. "Let the kid try." The board voted 6-5. Daniel won. 3 months later, the Detroit office posted a 17% increase in quarterly revenue. Resignations dropped. New contracts came in. The press wrote about it. The Pierce Prince saves Detroit branch. Daniel hated the nickname, but he loved the result. One night, he stood on the roof of the headquarters building. The city below glowed in amber light. Jonathan joined him, 2 mugs of black coffee in hand. "You're doing well," he said. "I'm still learning. That's more than I can say for most men your age, or mine." They sipped in silence for a moment. Then Jonathan said, "You know, when I was building this company, I thought success meant never needing anyone." Daniel looked at him. "And now? I think success is knowing when to listen." They stood together, 2 generations of Pierce, neither needing to fill the silence. It was enough. But Daniel wasn't done proving himself. He met with Sasha weekly, reviewing every contract he signed, every project he proposed. He consulted Elaine on personal decisions, especially when media invitations came in. "I don't want to be a celebrity," he said. "You won't be," she told him. "As long as you keep living by truth, not applause." In late spring, Daniel launched the Pierce Integrity Initiative, a new department within. The company focused on ethical innovation, sustainability, and social responsibility. It shocked the board. "What does ethics have to do with engineering?" someone asked. "Everything," Daniel replied. "Because what we build shapes how people live. And if we build without conscience, we're just another machine." Jonathan approved the budget himself. The department launched with 10 hires, half from within, half external. Young minds. Diverse. Hungry. Elaine attended the launch ceremony. Daniel introduced her as the reason any of it was possible. "My first blueprint was my mother," he said on stage. "She taught me that if you want to build something that lasts, start with integrity." The crowd rose in applause. Elaine cried silently. In the quiet aftermath, Jonathan approached her backstage. "You were right about him," he said. "I was right to keep going," she replied. He offered his hand. This time, she took it, not in reconciliation, but in respect. Because now they both saw what had come from 30 years of silence, sacrifice, and second chances. A legacy reborn. The elevator ride up to Jonathan's penthouse felt longer than usual. Daniel stood silently as the numbers ticked upward. He had grown used to boardrooms, press releases, and public attention, but today's meeting wasn't about business. It was personal. Unexpectedly so. Clarissa had requested the sit-down. Jonathan's wife. The woman who had been married to the man who abandoned Elaine and never once looked back, until a DNA test shattered the silence. Daniel wasn't sure what she wanted, but he had agreed. Not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. She had been quiet throughout the last few months, ever since his public emergence, but something told him she wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. Clarissa greeted him at the door in a crisp white blouse and pearl earrings, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," she said, extending a hand. Daniel took it. "Of course." She motioned to the grand sitting room, an architectural marvel of glass and stone, with floor-to-ceiling views of the city Jonathan had once tried to conquer alone. "I'm not sure what this meeting is about," Daniel said, sitting carefully on the edge of a leather armchair. Clarissa folded her legs and clasped her hands in her lap. "I'll be direct," she said. "This new reality, it's changed a lot." Daniel tilted his head. "It's clarified a lot." She nodded. "To you, perhaps. To me, it's complicated." "I'm not here to take your place," Daniel said, reading between the lines. She smiled. "I know. That's not what I'm worried about." "Then what are you worried about?" Clarissa took a breath. "I've spent the last 10 years watching Jonathan build a kingdom while holding his past at bay. I was told there were prior relationships, but not this, not you." Daniel stayed quiet. "And now," she continued, "you're the son he never claimed, and somehow the son he always needed. That's hard to compete with." "I'm not in competition with anyone." "Good," Clarissa said, standing to pour herself a glass of wine. "Because I'm not giving up my place either." Daniel's eyebrows lifted. "I never asked you to." She handed him a glass, but he didn't take it. "I'm not here for conflict," he said. "I'm here to help clean up a mess someone else made." Clarissa laughed softly. "That's noble of you." "It's not noble," Daniel said. "It's necessary." She looked at him then, really looked, as if trying to see past the calm exterior, past the headlines, past the well-tailored suits and measured words. "You remind me of Jonathan when he was younger," she said. "Before all of this hardened him." "I'm not him." "No," she agreed. "You're not." And for the first time there was a trace of something in her voice, respect, or maybe reluctant admiration. The conversation turned to quiet pleasantries after that. But as Daniel stepped into the elevator to leave, he felt it. The past wasn't done resurfacing, and neither were its complications. That weekend, Elaine received a letter. Not from Jonathan. From Clarissa. It was handwritten. Brief. "Mrs. Warren, I'd like to speak with you directly, not as rivals, but as women whose lives are now intertwined by a man neither of us fully understood. If you're willing, I'd like to meet. Clarissa Pierce." Elaine stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up the phone. They met in a small art gallery in Hyde Park. Neutral ground. Elaine arrived in a navy blouse and jeans, Clarissa in a beige pantsuit. They looked like opposites in every way, and yet there was a weight in both their eyes that said they carried more than most people would ever understand. "I don't bite," Clarissa said, offering a faint smile. Elaine smirked. "That's still up for debate." They walked the gallery in silence for a while before Clarissa spoke. "I didn't come here to make peace." "Good," Elaine said. "I didn't come to pretend we need it." Clarissa nodded. "Then let's talk truth. Go ahead. I know you think I stood by while Jonathan erased you, but I didn't know. Not really. He never spoke of you, never spoke of Daniel." Elaine studied her. "You expect me to believe that?" Clarissa didn't flinch. "Believe what you want. But I married a man who had already rewritten his past, and it turns out the edits were more severe than I realized." They stopped before a painting, an abstract piece filled with harsh lines and softer swirls. Clarissa continued, "You fought alone. I can see that now. And you raised a man who, despite everything, has more grace in him than most people I've ever met." Elaine said nothing. "I'm not your enemy," Clarissa added. Elaine turned to her. "Then don't act like one. You may not have created the wound, but you can't pretend it doesn't exist." Clarissa looked down. "I won't." Then she reached into her bag and handed Elaine a small velvet box. "What's this?" "A key," Clarissa said, "to an old storage unit in the city. Jonathan kept some things there, things from before the Empire. I think you deserve to see what's inside. Elaine held the box, and for the first time, she saw something crack in Clarissa's perfect facade, a hint of regret or surrender. Inside the storage unit, Elaine found remnants of a life once promised. Old photos, letters, a worn-out notebook filled with sketches of Jonathan's earliest ideas, many of which had now made him billions. Tucked between pages, she found something else, a folded sonogram. Her son, dated 30 years ago, unopened, unlabeled, but clearly hers. Her breath caught. He had kept it, all these years, despite everything. Elaine sat on the concrete floor, the sonogram in her lap, tears tracing her cheeks. Not because she forgave, but because she had proof. Proof that even in denial, Jonathan had carried some piece of Daniel. That night, she gave the sonogram to her son. Daniel stared at it for a long time. "This was me?" he asked softly. She nodded. He looked up at her. Why would he keep it? Elaine's voice was quiet. Because truth doesn't die, even when it's buried. In the following days, Jonathan's health began to falter. He missed 2 board meetings. His assistant whispered to Daniel during a hallway encounter, "He's been skipping appointments, not sleeping. You should talk to him." Daniel hesitated, then went. He found Jonathan on the balcony of the penthouse, a blanket over his legs, his eyes hollow. "You look like hell," Daniel said. Jonathan chuckled dryly. "It's a fitting place to start. Why didn't you tell anyone?" "What's the point?" Jonathan said. "Legacy doesn't delay death." Daniel sat beside him. "You're not dying." "No," Jonathan said. "But I am slowing down." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and handed Daniel a sealed envelope. "What's this?" "My resignation letter. Effective next quarter. I want you to take the reins." Daniel stared at him. "I'm not ready." "No one ever is," Jonathan said. "But you've earned it more honestly than I ever did." Daniel didn't open the envelope. He just asked one question. "Will you be proud of me even if I do it differently?" Jonathan looked at him, eyes glassy. "I'll be proud of you because you will." The air inside the Pierce Innovations boardroom was heavier than usual, thick with expectation, tension, and the kind of nervous anticipation that came when one era was ending and another was about to begin. Daniel Warren sat at the long table, not as a guest, not as a curiosity, but as a man, who now held the power to steer the very empire that had once denied his existence. Across from him, Jonathan Pierce sat in silence, looking smaller than usual, though no less commanding. He wasn't just the founder anymore. He was the father, passing the torch, even if his hand still hovered over the flame. At the head of the table sat Alicia Brandt, now interim chairperson. Marlowe was gone. Others were shifting allegiances, some out of principle, others out of self-preservation. This meeting wasn't routine. It was pivotal. Jonathan opened with a simple statement. "I've made the decision to formally step down as CEO at the end of the quarter. I will retain an advisory role, but leadership must evolve." A murmur rippled through the room. No one was truly surprised, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Alicia nodded, taking the floor. "We will begin the process of selecting a successor. While Daniel has made considerable contributions during his probationary period, we must discuss whether he should be considered, fairly and competitively." Daniel raised his hand slightly. "I'd like to speak." Everyone turned. He stood, calm, centered. "I'm not here to be handed anything, and I'm not asking for a crown I didn't earn." He paused, meeting each person's gaze. "But I've been inside this company for 6 months now. I've walked the halls. I've met the people. I've fixed a broken office in Detroit, launched an ethical innovation, ARM, and opened the floor to voices this board has ignored for years." He held up a file, his proposed executive plan. "I've drafted a vision, a 5-year strategy that balances innovation with responsibility, growth with humanity. I'm not offering a title. I'm offering a future." Samir leaned forward. "You're proposing a co-leadership model?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, a dual CEO structure for the next 18 months. Me and Alicia. After that, you can review performance and decide." Alicia looked startled. The board began whispering again. Jonathan said nothing. Daniel continued. My name isn't what qualifies me. What I've done should speak for itself, and if it's not enough, I'm willing to earn more." He sat. The room was silent. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. That evening, Daniel stood outside the glass building, staring up at the Pierce Innovations logo. Elaine joined him, arms crossed. "They're going to vote in your favor," she said. Daniel didn't answer. "You know that, right?" she pressed. He turned to her. "I didn't think I'd ever want this." "I know," she replied. "I used to imagine throwing rocks at that sign. I used to imagine burning it down," Elaine said with a half-smile. They stood in silence, then laughed. "Now look at us," Daniel whispered. "You raised me right into the lion's den." "No," she said, linking arms with him. "I raised you to walk in, speak truth, and change everything from the inside." 3 days later, the board reconvened. The vote was held. Daniel Warren and Alicia Brandt, interim co-CEOs of Pierce Innovations, effective immediately. The press release was elegant and powerful. Pierce Innovations is proud to usher in a new generation of leadership, with Alicia Brandt's seasoned experience and Daniel Warren's fresh perspective and proven impact. We look to the future with confidence, clarity, and renewed purpose. Clarissa read the headline in silence. She didn't call Jonathan. She didn't call Daniel. She simply poured herself a drink and whispered, "Well played." Jonathan watched the press conference from the penthouse. He didn't join the announcement. That was Daniel's call, and Daniel had decided to make the moment about the future, not the past. In the footage, Daniel stood behind the podium, flanked by Alicia. He spoke not as a son or a surprise heir, but as a leader. "This isn't just about innovation," Daniel said. "It's about integrity, about people, and about rewriting the legacy of one of the world's most powerful companies, not by erasing the past, but by confronting it." Jonathan smiled, weakly, then coughed into a handkerchief. There was blood. He folded the cloth quietly and said to no one, "It's in good hands now." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Daniel and Alicia reshaped internal policy. They initiated audits on departments that hadn't been reviewed in years. They implemented mental health support programs for employees. They rewrote the maternity and paternity leave structure, inspired by Elaine's story. And they formed a new council, made up of employees from every level of the company, to weigh in on innovation proposals. It was radical. Some investors balked, but the stock held steady, then rose. Daniel didn't stop working. But one Friday evening, he walked into a humble community center and surprised Elaine by joining her as a volunteer tutor. "These kids don't care that you're a CEO," she teased. "They shouldn't," he replied. "They should care that I show up." They sat side by side, helping teenagers with college essays. One of the boys asked Daniel, "How'd you get so lucky?" Daniel paused. "Luck didn't raise me," he said, glancing at his mother. "She did." The night before Jonathan's resignation took effect, father and son met on the rooftop one last time. "I made a lot of mistakes," Jonathan said, wind tugging at his coat. "I know," Daniel replied, "but you made this too. And you let me be part of it. You didn't need me." Daniel shook his head. "No, but I still wanted you to see who I became." Jonathan turned to him. "I see you, son." And Daniel, for the first time in his life, believed it. The gala was not Elaine's kind of place. It was too polished, too bright, too much glass and champagne and curated floral displays. The venue, Pierce Innovations' newest green-certified tower, was shimmering under night lights, reflecting a skyline that had once seemed so distant from her world. Elaine stood quietly at the edge of the room, her long navy gown modest, but elegant, a simple gold chain resting against her collarbone. Daniel had insisted she attend, and Jonathan had seconded it, even though he wouldn't be present. "He wants this to be yours as much as mine," Daniel had told her. "He just doesn't know how to say it." The event was a celebration, the formal transition of Pierce Innovations' leadership, the debut of the company's new, strategic direction, and a fundraiser benefiting underfunded school programs in low-income communities. Daniel's idea. Elaine watched as her son moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. No longer an outsider, no longer a secret. He greeted senators and tech founders, shook hands with partners from Tokyo and Tel Aviv, posed for photos with interns and janitors alike. He had become exactly the kind of man she'd hoped he would be. Not powerful for the sake of power, but responsible. Grounded. Compassionate. Later in the evening, Daniel took the stage. He stood beneath a massive LED screen, his name and title displayed behind him, Daniel Warren, co-CEO, Pierce Innovations. The crowd applauded. Flashbulbs popped. But when he spoke, his voice softened. "Before I talk about the future," he said, "I want to talk about how I got here." He turned toward Elaine, who froze beneath the spotlight now cast upon her. "There's a woman in this room who raised me with nothing but love, purpose, and truth. She worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and still managed to make every birthday feel like a miracle. She read to me every night, even when she had to be up by 5. She taught me that your worth isn't defined by how the world sees you, but by how you see yourself." Elaine's eyes blurred. Daniel continued, "I was denied, not just legally, but personally. And this woman stood in that gap and never let me fall through. So tonight, as I accept this role and this responsibility, I do it not just in my name, but in hers." He turned fully toward her. "Ladies and gentlemen, please recognize the reason I'm here. My mother, Elaine Warren." The room stood as one. The applause was thunderous. Elaine didn't move at first. Then, slowly, she walked toward the stage, her steps light but certain. Daniel met her at the top of the steps, took her hand and whispered, "You built this." I just walked in the front door. After the gala, the 2 of them sat alone on the rooftop terrace. The city stretched endlessly before them. Elaine slipped off her heels and leaned back in a chair, staring at the stars. "You did it," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "We did it." She looked at him, proud. "You changed this company." "No," he said. "You changed me. And I brought that change here." She smiled. "So, what now?" He thought for a long moment. "I think we rewrite the rules," he said, "about what leadership means, about what legacy should look like." "And Jonathan?" Daniel nodded slowly. "He gave me the opportunity, and then stepped back when it mattered. That's more than I ever expected." Elaine was quiet for a while. "I used to wonder if you'd grow up resenting him," she said. "I did," Daniel replied. "But then I realized, carrying that would only hold me back. I'm not erasing what he did. I'm just not letting it define me." She looked up at him, eyes gleaming. "That," she said, "is what makes you a man." The next morning, Jonathan called. His voice was weak. "I saw the speech," he said. Daniel's tone softened. "You okay?" "No," Jonathan admitted. "But I'm at peace." There was a pause. "I don't have much time," he added, "and I've made peace with that. But before I go, I need to ask you one last thing. Anything. Promise me you'll take care of this company, but never at the cost of your soul." Daniel swallowed hard. "I promise." 1 week later, Jonathan Pierce passed away. Peacefully, quietly, in the penthouse he built, surrounded by the silence he used to worship and the regrets he had finally come to accept. His will, updated and simple, left everything to Daniel, with specific instructions to create a foundation in Elaine's name. Elaine was listed in the obituary not as former wife, but as mother of his legacy. The press coverage was respectful, clean, but the real eulogy was spoken by Daniel at a private ceremony beneath a tree Jonathan had planted during his first year of building Pierce Innovations. "He was flawed," Daniel said, "but he gave me the chance to finish what he started, on better terms." Months passed. Elaine moved out of her small apartment and into a home Daniel bought for her just outside the city. Not a mansion, just a place with a garden, a reading room, and a front porch. Daniel visited every Sunday. They cooked. They talked. They laughed. Sometimes they said nothing at all, just enjoyed the quiet peace earned by decades of storms. Pierce Innovations thrived under Daniel's leadership. Alicia eventually stepped down, handing him full control. The company became known not just for its technological breakthroughs, but for its culture, a place where janitors could become department heads, and where every voice was considered vital to progress. Elaine's name adorned the foundation that provided college scholarships to children raised in single-parent homes. Her story was part of the company's orientation training, not dramatized, just honored. Daniel was invited to speak at universities, tech summits, even the White House. But he always started his speeches the same way. I'm Daniel Warren. My mother raised me, and everything I build starts from there. One afternoon, years later, he stood in front of a new Pierce Innovations building. The plaque at the entrance read, "The Elaine Warren Center for Innovation and Integrity." Daniel stood beside his wife. Yes, he had found love, real love, and their 2 young children. He told them, "Your grandmother changed the world, not with technology, but with love, with courage, with the kind of truth that reshapes legacies." Elaine, now silver-haired but still proud, smiled. And for the first time in her life, the world saw her not as the woman who had been left behind, but as the woman whose strength built an empire. If this journey moved you, share it with someone who believes in the power of a mother's love. Like, comment, and subscribe to Mr. Asher Stories, your home for unforgettable tales where justice, redemption, and love always rise to the surface. And remember, no matter how far you've come, the truth will always meet you there.